Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how to do a pivot table in Excel. I'm going to go through a very simple example and show you some of the real power and strength of using a pivot table in Excel to quickly do analysis and quickly look at and find patterns in your data. So let's jump over to Excel and get started. What I have here is a spreadsheet, an inventory of all of the trees in my neighborhood. This inventory was done last year, and we looked at every tree in the neighborhood. Here's the address, here's the street name, here's the genus and species of the tree, here's its diameter, here's its size, small, medium, or large, here's the scientific name of the tree, and here's the common name of the tree. And if we look at our data, we see that we have hundreds and hundreds of rows here with all sorts of trees on all sorts of streets, where our data goes down to row 1178. So that's a lot of data to go through, and it would be a lot of data to have to go through by hand to answer some simple questions like how many of which tree do we have, and where are they, and what size might they be. So a fast way to do that kind of analysis in Excel is to create a pivot table. And that'll answer those questions for us very quickly and easily. So what I like to do is first create another worksheet. So I'm going to click the plus sign down here to create another worksheet. And I like to go ahead and rename it. So I right click and go to rename. And I'm going to name it pivots because I know that I'm putting my pivot tables here. So I'm going to put my pivot tables in this other sheet, and it's going to be referencing all of this data we have here. So the way to do that is I start by going to where I want my pivot tables to be. Next, I go to Insert, and Pivot Table is the very first link over here on the left. So I tell it I want to insert a pivot table, and it will enter it wherever I have my cell selected here. So A1 is fine. I'll say Insert Pivot Table, and it brings up a window asking us for information to create this pivot table. So first it says choose the data you want to analyze, and it has a blank box here. So what that's asking us is where is the table or range or information that we want to include in our pivot table? Well, it's in our inventory tab, so all I have to do is with my mouse cursor here in the box that says table range, I click over to inventory, and notice that our box stays here on top, and I can click behind it, and I can grab all of these columns like that. And now it says our table range is inventory columns A through column O. And that's what I want. Down here it asks us where we want the pivot table to be placed. We'll put it in pivots in cell A1. We'll click OK. And now this looks very different. Now Excel has done something unusual. It's put in sort of a placeholder on here on the left for our pivot table number 1. And over on the right, it has pivot table fields. And what it's listed here are all of the column headings from our inventory page: address, street, family, genus, species, etc. So I might want to look up all of the different types of trees on the street by their common name. And there are 4 boxes down here on the bottom right: filters, columns, rows, and values. And I'll go through each one of these, but I'm going to start with rows on the bottom left-hand side because that's the one we most commonly use in pivot tables. So I might want to look at the common name of the tree. So this is the name of a tree like a red maple or a yellow oak, a poplar, sugar maple. These are the common names that we know the trees by. So I might want to look and drag this down here. And notice that I can just drag these fields back and forth like this. Don't worry about screwing anything up. We can undo it. I can drag these right in and out of each of these. So when I drag this down into rows, we see that it puts each different kind of tree in one row. So the rows box lists what we want in each row. So we see every different type of tree here in one row. And we see it only goes down to row 54, even though our inventory, as we saw, has over 1,000 rows. That's because each of these are unique. It just lists them one time. Okay, so this is nice. It tells us all of the different trees we have in the neighborhood, but what if we want to know how many of each we have? We can also grab survey common name and put it in values. And by default, Excel will count those values. You see up here it says count of common name. That's the name of our column over here. So it's counting each of those up and telling us how many we have. Here it says we have 424 blanks. Red maple, you can see that we have 118 red maples, 86 pin oaks, 77 flowering dogwoods. So already we're finding some information about this data set that would be very difficult to find by going through over 100 rows over here. There's also this field up here that says columns. So we can add a column to our pivot table by dragging in, for instance, the street that it's on. Now we get much more complicated because it takes the different streets in our neighborhood, puts them across the top in columns. Now we can see how many of each tree is on each street. For instance, there are 15 red maples on Audubon Parkway. Looking at the red maple again, we see that there are 11 on Cardinal and 11 on Chickadee. So again, this is a very useful function that we can look up easily so that now we can see where these trees are and count them up very quickly, much more quickly than we could going through this whole 1,000 rows of data. So that leaves one of our pivot table fields over here, filters. And this allows us to add a filter to the whole data set just to look at certain information. So maybe we wanted to see only the very large trees that we have in the area. So these are S, M, and L for the most part for small, medium, and large. So I can grab size and drop it in filters. And what Excel does is put this filter at the top where now I can pull down this arrow and select just the small, medium, or large trees. So I'll select L for large. And now notice that it shows me just the large trees in the neighborhood. Conveniently, Excel also gives me a grand total here for each row. So it shows me how many large trees of each kind we have. And Excel gives me a grand total at the bottom that shows me how many trees are on each street. In the corner over here, we see a total for the whole table, 491, telling me that we have 491 large trees in the neighborhood. I can change this to small trees, do the same thing, and we can see we have a total of 100 small trees of these different types on these different streets. So this is the very basics of pivot tables. This is how we use these 4 different fields. But there's other things we can do here. For example, I could take street out of columns and put it underneath rows. So now we can look at each additional tree and see where those are located. For instance, for red maples, we have those trees on these particular street. For silver maples, we have those trees on this street. I can also, if I want to look at this data a different way, I can swap the common name and the street just by dragging them back and forth. Now it shows me the different trees on each street. For instance, on Meadowlark, we have a pin oak, a red maple, a sweet gum, and a white ash. And remember, there's nothing you have to worry about in here. You're not deleting data. You're not removing anything. This is just a way to look at it. All of our data stays the same over here in inventory, and pivots are just a way to look at this data and split it apart and analyze it in different ways. It's a powerful tool, and you can see that it hasn't taken us very long to quickly go through this information, build a pivot table, and find some results about our data. So that's our introduction to pivot tables. Go ahead and give it a try yourself, and I appreciate you watching. Thank you.